Welcome along to the transfer show. Just 6 days left of what has already been a record-breaking window. Is there still time for the biggest transfer in British football history to go through in the shape of Alexander Isak? Bereze secured his move away from Crystal Palace at the weekend, but will club captain Marc Guehi also leave Selhurst Park before the deadline? Well, there we are. It's been quite a summer in every sense for Crystal Palace. It's going to be a very eventful last few days too. By the looks of things, as you can see, Rob Dorset, Kaveh Solikol alongside me. Kaveh, time running out then for Marc Guehi to make his move. What's the latest?
Well, there's lots of talk that Marc Guehi could end up being a Liverpool player before the window closes. The situation is that no new approach has been made for Marc Guehi yet. So as things stand, he is still a Crystal Palace player, and he's preparing for Crystal Palace's really important European playoff game in Norway on Thursday night. Now, he's turned down the offer of a new contract, and he's in a really, really strong position. Of course, he's aware that Liverpool are interested in signing him, and I think if the price was right, Crystal Palace would let him go if they can sign a replacement. And we know they're in the market to try and sign a replacement. And the reason I say he's in a really strong position is because he knows in January he could sign an agreement with a foreign club, because he'll be a free agent next summer. And the kind of clubs we're talking about are clubs of the calibre of Real Madrid, Barcelona, Juventus. Those could all be options for him in January. That's why I think, compared to some of the other players who are very unhappy with their situations and are trying to force through a move, Marc Guehi is not in that boat at all. He is very happy at Crystal Palace until he's told that the situation has changed.
It's a really interesting one, Carver, isn't it? Because you and I have both been working on this story, and I think it's pretty clear that there's quite a lot of power in Marc Guehi's hands here. I think both clubs have kind of backed off for him to decide what he wants to do, is the impression I get from talking to people. And so, and I think he's a little bit conflicted about what he wants to do, because he has an incredible loyalty to Crystal Palace. They've given him an opportunity that got him into the England squad, and so he isn't absolutely convinced that now is the right time to leave, when he's got all those options that Carvey's talking about next summer as well. But of course, Liverpool is a huge football club, and he will clearly be very excited at that prospect.
Yeah, speaking of conflicted and potential reintegrations or not, we're
going for the big one now.
Yeah, let's move straight
one.
to Alexander Isak, shall we? And will we now see some movement with regards to his future following last night's classic encounter between Newcastle and Liverpool? We understand two of Newcastle's board met with the Sweden striker at his house to discuss his future as he tries to push through a move to the champions. So before we hear from these two on it, we'll get to Keith Downey at St James's Park. Keith, very good to see you. What can Newcastle fans read into this meeting then at Isak's house?
Well, I think the positive thinking Newcastle United supporters could read into it that they are trying to come to some kind of agreement that will see Alexander Isak reintegrate with the first team squad and be available to Eddie Howe moving forward into the season. Remember, he's essentially refused to play in those first two matches against Aston Villa and then Liverpool, and I would suggest if he remains a Newcastle United player, he won't be available either to play Leeds United this weekend. But I think the more pessimistic amongst the Newcastle fans will think perhaps they are having a meeting to try and get some finality onto this. Now, until we find out exactly what happened between those four walls, we're going to have to sort of speculate and guess. But I think as we stand here right now, 6 days until the transfer window opens, I think all options are on the table. We could yet see Liverpool come back in. I think Alexander Isak still would like to move away from the football club, and it's dragged on for a long time now, this hasn't it? And you would have to suggest that it would probably be difficult for him to reintegrate back into the squad, given the strength of feeling among the supporters. Just listening to some of the stuff I heard last night here at St James's Park, and then we see the banners from the fans. I think it would be difficult for him to reintegrate. But of course, if Liverpool don't come to the table with an offer that's acceptable to Newcastle, then he of course will remain a Newcastle United player. But behind all of this, and this has been the case for a number of weeks now, is that Newcastle are pretty much getting desperate when it comes to replacements. We know they tried to sign Benjamin Sesko as a replacement for Isak to allow him to go. They failed. They tried to sign Hugo Ekitike, who of course went to Liverpool and ironically scored here at St James's Park against Newcastle last night. They missed out on João Pedro and Liam Delap, and they've tried and failed a number of times, and they're still at the table, active in the market. And I think, look, if they manage to get maybe one for them, hopefully two, and I still think there's a chance Alexander Isak could leave between now and the closure of the transfer window. But Eddie Howe spoke post-match last night, didn't he? He appealed for clarity. He said he wanted the narrative to change, the story to move on. But as we stand here, a day after that Liverpool game, when I think a lot of us thought once the Liverpool game was out the way we could move on, we're still stood here in this grey area of what has become an absolute saga involving both Liverpool and Newcastle United.
Yeah, it's been a tough window for Newcastle, hasn't it? I mean, you mentioned the replacements. That's still the stance, isn't it? The club's position. They want replacements before considering letting Isak go. Can you see a situation where Isak is sold even if Newcastle don't sign a replacement?
Look, I think it would be difficult for them, but if the noise is coming from Isak are that he will refuse to play and he's not interested in being reintegrated, then yes, I think in an ideal world they would have two replacements in. I think, and I've been saying this for a number of weeks now, I think even if they got one replacement in now, and we know they've been trying to sign Johan Wissa from Brentford, we know they're interested in Jørgen Strand Larsen from Wales because they made that £50 million offer yesterday, which of course was turned down by Wolverhampton Wanderers. So we know that Newcastle have been trying, and I think if they were to, Dave, if they were even to get in one, I think it would leave them with a decision to make on Alexander Isak. Ideally they would like two, of course. But then we see the situation with Anthony Gordon last night being sent off, so he's missing for the next 3 matches. So even the backup striker who's playing out of position is going to be missing. So it's a really, really tough situation they're in. I still see a scenario where Alexander Isak goes between now and Monday. I think in a not an ideal world, but in a preferable situation to Newcastle, they would have at least one player in. If they were able to get in both Wissa and Strand Larsen, of course, that would open the door for Alexander Isak if the offer is acceptable. But that's pretty much been the situation for weeks now, and Newcastle have found it hard up until now to bring in at least one replacement. And I have to say that story is continuing into this last week of the transfer window.
Keith, thank you very much. Well, poor Keith Down. He wakes up at 4 o'clock in the morning with nightmares about Alexander Isak, Carver. I'm sure he does.
I feel sorry for the poor guy. He's a heck of a window, Keith. He's done a fantastic job.
He's been there noon and night, hasn't he? Carver, let's cut to the chase. Do you think Isak will be a Liverpool player by the end of this window?
Oof. I mean, judging by what Keith says, I think there's a good chance that could happen, but only if Newcastle sign two forwards and only if Liverpool increase their offer. I could see it happening.
OK. Rob, I mean, Newcastle have been trying desperately to find a striker all summer, as Keith was just talking about. He mentioned yesterday they failed with a £50 million bid for Jørgen Strand Larsen. It seems like quite a lot of money for the Wolves attacker. They're obviously going to get quite a bit when they get rid of or sell Isak on. Do you think they'll go back in with an improved offer for Strand Larsen? Because 50 million is already pretty top.
It is. Look, the impression I get from the people I've been talking to is that Newcastle is a very well-run football club, and they're trying to work out what good value is here. And they know they're going to get, potentially, if they sell Isak, 120 million pounds for him, potentially. So they can afford to buy Strand Larsen and probably Johan Wissa at Brentford as well. But they'd break the bank to do it and spend all of that money. And do they think that, with all due respect, Jørgen Strand Larsen and Johan Wissa are worth 120 million pounds for the two of them? I think they're keeping their financial situation very frugal and sensible. So look, they had a £50 million bid rejected by Wolves yesterday. Newcastle don't want to pay more than that. They don't think he's worth more than that. And I think it's a bit of a stalemate because Wolves categorically don't want to sell him. they don't want to sell him anyway, but they certainly don't want to sell him this late in the window when he's such a key player for them, and there's too little time in the window left for him to get a replacement in. And you go into Wissa, and then we get this whole domino effect, don't we, where Brentford rejected £40 million bid from Newcastle for Wissa last week. Brentford are considering a move for Max Bayer. And Borussia Dortmund is one of the options they're looking at, and he is potentially a replacement for Wissa. So they've not made an approach yet. Might they only make an approach if Newcastle do a deal for Wissa? And by the way, to continue that domino effect, Borussia Dortmund are closing in on Fabio Silva at Wolves, who's potentially a replacement for Bayer. So you look at all of that, and all the people that Carver and I are talking to in the industry right now are saying there's an awful lot of players that are ready to move, and an awful lot of clubs that want those players, but they need something to start the domino effect rolling. And that's why I think you and I both feel it's the quiet before the storm right now, and a lot of these deals could happen when clubs get maybe a little bit desperate to move players on and bring new faces in with just 6 days of the window left. Yeah,
the old housing chain, isn't it? One little piece moves and then all of a sudden it can really start to flow. So can you see a scenario where Wissa and Strand Larsen are both at Newcastle? Do you think that's likely if you're a betting man?
Only if Brentford and Wolves are prepared to compromise on their asking prices. And I don't see either of those things happening right now. Look, I don't believe in this idea that everybody's been talking about where Newcastle have in mind a certain profile and value of player that they need to replace Callum Wilson, and then a separate profile and calibre of player and price to replace Alexander Isak. They need strikers. You know, I don't think Eddie Howe looks at his squad and goes, OK, well, you're a replacement for Callum Wilson, you're a replacement for... Which am I going to pick? Because I want to play the guy who's a replacement for Isak. It doesn't work like that. He needs bodies in, he needs two strikers. And I think they'll get the best deal they can. How much they spend and whether they get them, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see over the next few days. I genuinely don't know, and that's what makes this window so exciting. I don't know where it's going to go from here. I really don't.
It's very thoughtful. Will Osula as well. He's got a nice goal last night.
Well, exactly,
talking about